Hey everybody, I'm Sharon Waxman, the editor-in-chief of TheWrap. We're so happy to have you here for the ongoing screening series 2021 Awards and International Films. We are excited today to bring you one of the most significant documentaries that is in contention for this year's award season. It's called All In, The Fight for Democracy, and it is an entry in the Best Documentary Feature Film category. So we're going to show you a trailer of the film, and then we're going to go right into a conversation with one of the co-directors of the film, Lisa Cortez. For our audience, you guys can participate in the live chat of the stream. Tell us your thoughts about the film, your reactions to the film, tell us where you're coming from, tell us whatever you want to tell us. And so let's go. Here we go. Before we bring on our guest, let's take a look at the trailer for All In, The Fight for Democracy.
If the power of the right to vote was truly made available to everyone in America, it would change the future of this nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams!
When I started running for governor, we anticipated that voter suppression was going to be instrumental in Ryan's campaign, and we were right. We've been in line for 5 hours.
They said, "You've already voted." Looks like several days ago. No, I would have remembered that.
Thousands of people were told no and didn't have the authority to demand better.
These lines are insane. We have precinct consolidation, non-training of local election officials.
I knew something had gone horribly wrong. The system that is supposed to protect our democracy didn't work the way it was supposed to.
States implement voter suppression laws all across the country.
Things like new voter ID laws, purging. You're knocked off the roll. Gerrymandering.
Changing the voting boundaries.
Ohio is a use it or lose it state.
In the United States, the right to vote is the only right you can lose simply for not using it.
Jim Crow 2.0, that's what we're saying. We've got a lot of work to do.
When we started as a country,
6% of people are eligible to vote. There are still forces that are determined to keep citizens from voting.
Unless we fight for the right to vote, our democracy is put at risk.
The fight over voting rights is ultimately about power.
The states have figured out how to stop African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the young, and the poor from voting.
history is never a straight line. It's always a fight.
I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
Try to make history. The vote matters.
You belong. You have value.
Welcome back. So it's now my pleasure to introduce one of the film's two directors, Lisa Cortez.
Hi, Sharon.
Hey, Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
For all of you who don't know Lisa, director Lisa Cortez received her bachelor's degree from Yale University and has gone on to become an Academy Award and Emmy-nominated producer and director. Her film productions have received more than 70 international awards and nominations. The film Precious in 2009 is one she executive produced. It received the Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize for Drama at the Sundance Film Festival. I was there that year, I remember it well. She was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and the film won 2. Her other work has included The Apollo and the remix Hip Hop X Fashion, all from her most recent work. So welcome to you, Lisa.
Hi, Sharon.
So, pardon me. What I wanted to start off by saying is that this film is, first of all, should be required viewing, it seems to me, in every school and university, because it basically tells the story and connects the dots about voter suppression of marginalized community, and particularly Black communities in this country. So we knew this, we sort of knew it, but this puts it all together on a historic continuum, goes all the way back into the 19th century. So I think it's a really important piece of work. So let me just start by thanking you for it. How did you get involved in this project? And we should mention your co-director, Liz Garvis, is not here today, but I know you guys worked closely together.
Yes, it's like, as Liz and I like to say, to make this film, to cover hundreds of years of American history, we definitely developed a hive mind. The origin story of All In begins with Stacey Abrams, not only in sharing her story, but most importantly, as a producer. Stacey had the idea to find filmmakers to unpack this history and thread the past to the present in telling it. So she met with several filmmakers, she decided upon our team, and then joined us in not only sharing great contacts, and as you see, the incredible range of people that we have in our film, but also her personal story, which we were able to incorporate as that kind of contemporary heartbeat for people who had heard about Georgia in 2018, but didn't really know what happened there then. And obviously right now, the impact of 2018 Georgia to the most recent national elections, and of course, the Georgia Senate runoffs.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things that we need to remind people is that Stacey Abrams, I'm just going to say, she was robbed of the governorship in 2018 because the governor was also running the show, Brian Kemp, in terms of the election organization and decisions around that, and so was able to make sure a lot of votes weren't counted. And instead of saying, "Oh, I'll beat him next time," Stacey Abrams said, "We're going to fix the system. And she set out to fix the system. And that led to the remarkable outcome that we had just in the runoff in January, in which now the governorship hasn't changed, but both Senate seats have gone to Democrats. And I believe it was an unprecedented voter turnout in Georgia. But for really, the most impactful things to me, as somebody who is a student of history, was to realize how much I did not know about active voter suppression. So what you're talking about is not what strikes the sort of average literate person as, oh, there are long lines, oh, it's harder, oh, there's been gerrymandering. What the film lays out for you, beat by beat, decade by decade almost, is the very active, deliberate, and even explicit campaign to stop Black people from voting. Okay, so dumb question. Were you deeply familiar with that detail before you did this film?
Well, Sharon, I'm a student of history also, and I also have an incredible personal history with my parents and my grandparents being very involved in the civil rights movement and the fight for the franchise. But there are still things that one discovers. And, in making this film and figuring out how do you unpack all of these hundreds of years, starting from the inception of our country, it really brought a lot to think about how cyclical it has been and how, really the dance that we have had with progress and retrenchment. I think the big discovery for me was learning about Operation Eagle Eye in Arizona. Chief Justice Rehnquist, who was a mentor for Roberts. And, Rehnquist hated the Voting Rights Act and, had people, basically instituted de facto literacy tests to disenfranchise African Americans, Latinx people, the thing.
Native Americans as well, right?
Yeah. Brown, Black, poor, young people, we have been the targets. And the thing about, voter suppression is that sometimes people want to just dismiss and say it's bureaucratic. Like,
right.
Why don't you just go get the ID?
Right. Right. What's the big deal?
And use that. Well, you know what? If you're born in the Jim Crow South, you might not have been born in a hospital and have a birth certificate. Or you live in public housing and you don't have a driver's license. But you live in Texas and you can use your gun license and you can't use your student ID. We start to see who is being given, access and those who are being denied. And being made more difficult of continuously moving around how one gets in and stays qualified and is not purged and removed and denied this really what, we feel is the most sacred right.
Yes, indeed. Well, one statistic that just floored me that's in your film is that after all of these new tools essentially to suppress the vote, whether that was the poll tax or the literacy test or something called the black codes that were different ways of disenfranchising black voters, that it went from something like 60% of black people in the South being registered to vote to, in the 1940s, 3% is what the film says. That, I don't think you get any more stark proof than that the literacy test was not, by the way, of course, I didn't know that the literacy test wasn't just reading a few pages of something. The literacy test was actually something quite complex, and that even a college, student or whatever college educated person would have a challenge passing it. But that shows you what was really at play. So when we get to 2018 or 2019 or 2020, when they're doing really kind of crude things like, let's reduce the number of ballot boxes or polling stations willy-nilly. There is no logic. Why would you do that? If your job is to get people to vote, then why would you reduce the number of polling places?
And,
yes.
in Georgia, what was, you alluded to before with Brian Kemp when he was running against Stacey Abrams, he was the Secretary of State, so he's running against, but he's like the umpire. So, there's no parity there, but that is what, they allowed to happen.
Yeah. And several times when I was watching the film, I felt like in some ways this was a companion piece to the movie The 13th that Ava DuVernay did a number of years ago, because it's similar in the sense that film as well connected the dots between sort of the most retrograde, slavery era policies to what these much more subtly racist policies in terms of incarceration in our country, and how that has been a way to maintain control over the African American population in some ways. It was incontrovertible when I looked at that, and it was, again, an education, as in like, okay, it's not just a shading here and there. It's very stark and it's very evident when you put it out there. This film, I felt, did the same in terms of demonstrating what disenfranchised people, marginalized communities are actually up against, because it isn't, frankly, part of my daily experience. And so you read about it, but until you see the details the way you've laid it out and the way Stacey Abrams so eloquently challenges it, and effectively challenges it, you're like, me as an average person, this is my problem too. This is absolutely my problem too. I am not interested in living in a country where not everybody gets to vote. So I think it's a really important piece of work from that perspective too. Talk a bit, it's been out since September, I believe, right, the film?
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit, obviously this is coming out in the heat of this very, very highly tense election, and then contested election. So what has been the journey of the film in that very highly pressurized environment?
Well, when we released the film in September, we actually were lucky to engage with audiences on a variety of levels, from drive-ins to a couple of theaters that were open, and then of course the opportunity that a digital platform like Amazon provides. And so, it was very important for us as we, finished the film in the midst of a pandemic, that we hit the milestones to deliver so that the film could be part of providing truthful information and be used as a tool for engagement and to be in conversation with everything that was happening, and also to complement the social impact campaign, which was very extensive. With our social impact campaign, we were able to mobilize and engage over 80 million Americans. And we provide up-to-date and trusted information. We provided grants to local organizations who had boots on the ground and were helping people how to figure out how to vote and make certain that they were registered and make a plan to go with others. And then we also created a digital voting action hub, allinforvoting.com, which, when you talk about education, we actually have curriculums there for high school and college students. We did a lot of work with teachers across the country. And then, of course, all of our amazing partner organizations that range from the Southern Poverty Law Center to the ACLU, When We All Vote, Voto Latino. So because I think, when you're having these conversations, when you're looking to heighten engagement, you can't do it in your silo. And very much in keeping with what Stacey Abrams has always said, you have to meet people where they are. So we even had a 45-city bus tour where there were screenings of the film, plus we registered people. And so that was, how everything from the film, the message, the history, the tools, the engagement were in conversation with, I think, what Americans were thinking and asking about. How did we get here? How can we get engaged? And what are those steps of, if we encounter voter suppression, what can we do to make certain that our voice and our vote is reflected? So it's been, and it continues on. We are still working with schools, because as you and I were talking about in the beginning, before we went on camera, unfortunately, yes, there's been progress, but we're also seeing the pushback. We're also seeing the legislation that's coming up. That's
kind of hard to miss.
And so it's Evergreen. This is a form that is the past is prelude to this moment. And it is a moment that we still have to be ever vigilant, have a sense of righteous indignation, and be engaged.
It feels like the title of the film is very appropriate, because the right to vote is the foundation of a democracy. And if you can't exercise that right, then you really don't have a democracy. I'm a big believer, in free information. I'm a big First Amendment person because obviously I'm a journalist, and that's where, to me, the ability to challenge authority, to have the freedom to do that and hold people accountable is a bedrock. But fundamentally, the whole idea of like one person, one vote, if we can't fulfill the promise of that, then I don't know what we're doing. And so this, to me, lays bare the reality of how power works, and that how you have to always sort of push back against the forces that are going to want to keep power. It's the nature of institutions and the nature of human beings. They have power, they want to keep it, no matter what the stated value is, I don't know, do you feel like, I know that you say that it's an ongoing evergreen pushback, but doesn't it feel to you like there's significant progress being made, starting by informing people about what is really behind the struggle to vote, to get the vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think our history shows that it is this pendulum effect of progress and retrenchment.
Mm-hmm.
I think what has dramatically changed, and is the engagement and outreach to communities who traditionally were not a part of this conversation, and is a part of flagging, when these moments happen and are happening that are trying to push back. So I think the film, in illustrating the history, but also talking about what you can do and what you need to be aware of, is a part of a really progressive conversation of change.
I want to ask you a question that's not directly related to the film, but it's been on my mind a lot. I feel in some ways what we saw at the Capitol on January 6th was like the really ugly underbelly of our society showing itself at its worst. I suppose it could get worse, because if they were armed, if everybody was armed, a few of them were armed, but it would have been worse. And we're still contending with it. As we push forward as a society and talk about rectifying old wrongs, bringing our values actually into execution, like living our values and being a fair and just society, and you see this virulent pushback by people who are desperate and angry and full of rage and violent, what do you think? What are your thoughts about how we deal with that as a democracy and as a society?
I feel it's super important, Sharon, that we don't, that we call it for what it is. These domestic racist terrorists are a threat to all of us. And you can't, kind of couch it with language that doesn't have that impact. Because you then create a space where the subsequent lies associated with their positions are allowed to flourish without any critique. I mean, you have to, one should examine completely what this is, and, so that we can be prepared and our communities can be protected, because there was a firestorm and there can be a firestorm.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, yeah. I mean, if we don't learn the lessons of that incident, what happened on January 6th, I would say shame on us, right? We're just not paying attention.
Right. It's not like a little pat on the, no, it's
right. We didn't stub our toe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just as you go forward, what do you think? I mean, Stacey Abrams obviously has a brilliant political future ahead of her. So good for you. She's probably a good friend of yours at this point. So, do you think that there's more documentary work ahead for you in this general area as Stacey continues her kind of, I'd say, meteoric rise as a politician? She's running for governor now, right?
She has not declared. Her next step will be.
Okay.
I will always continue to support and amplify Stacey in any way that I can be of service to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's quite a remarkable person, and learning her life story is really one of the pleasures of the film, and where she comes from, her parents and her big family, and what they instilled in her. That was all. It was great to have that narrative, broader narrative built around.
Right, it's the heartbeat of the film. And, Stacey was so generous with her time, as I said earlier, and contacts, but also as a producer and understanding that, what that entails in creating a compelling narrative that has had and fulfilled lofty goals of how a film can really be in conversation with all Americans, in sharing a history, but also in providing a North Star of what we can aspire to and how we can become a better nation.
I feel like I've given you short shrift as directors, you and Liz, because just because you have a compelling topic doesn't mean you make a compelling film. And I think you did make a very compelling film. And you took a broad, very broad subject and found a way to not just tell Stacey's story, which on its own, it would just be a compelling story in and of itself, but to weave in all of that history and make it such a strong case for why equal rights in voting is so important. So congratulations to Lisa, and regards to Liz when you see her.
I'll share something, Sharon, that's oftentimes Liz and I have talked about, the craft of making this film is that we were looking at this tension, we were looking at the progress and retrenchment, and we were like, okay, this has to be like a monster movie. You have to think like, I chopped the head off the monster, it's dead. But no, the monster resurfaces, and how does it, morph, but still show up with the same targeted weaponization. And, through music and, of course, our wonderful interviews, but our animation, through this very interesting combination of creative elements, though that's what we were always thinking about, is the story structure, the drama of our history, and but also the promise of our future. Yeah, well, it was, and you're working under this time constraint because you need to get it done before the election, get it out there, and in the middle of the pandemic and all of that. So, really, a really impressive accomplishment, and I think it's going to get to be, a part of the history of this time when we look back. The film will have its own niche, in all of these huge things that are happening at this time. And so I think that's exciting for you, because you really got to chronicle history, teach history, and then be part of history at the same time. It's pretty great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. Best of luck.
Here, Sharon.
Thank you to everyone for joining us today for our Q&A and screening of All In, the Fight for Democracy. It was really great to have everybody. Be sure to take advantage of our free trial to TheWrap Pro and be first to know about our upcoming screenings and events. You can also check back on our screenings page, screenings.thewrap.com, as well, where you can also watch the interviews from all the films in our screening series this year. Thanks for coming.